Captain Maria Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty and watched 12 massive alien ships surround her vessel. The enemy dreadnoughts were each 3 times the size of her battlecruiser, and their weapons could turn her ship into space. Dust in seconds. She knew this was the end, but something deep inside her refused to accept it. The comm system crackled to life, and an alien voice filled the bridge. The translator made the words sound cold and mechanical, but the meaning was clear. Enough. Human vessel, you are completely surrounded and have no chance of escape. Surrender immediately or face total destruction. You have 5 minutes to comply. Lieutenant Jake Harrison turned from his tactical station with sweat running down his face. Captain, our main engines are down to 20% power. We lost half our weapon batteries in the last attack and shields are barely holding. We have maybe 30 minutes of life support left after that last hull breach. Chief Engineer Lisa Carter's voice came through the intercom from the engine room. Captain, I'm holding this ship together with spare parts and prayers. One more hit to our reactor core and we're all dead anyway. Rodriguez looked around the bridge at her crew of 300 souls. They were the last survivors from the human colony worlds that had fallen to the alien invasion. Earth itself had gone silent 2 months ago. The evacuation fleets carrying civilian refugees were somewhere out there in the dark trying to reach the Outer Rim colonies, but no one knew if they had made it. The aliens called themselves the Hegemony, and they had swept through human space like a disease. 17 worlds had fallen in 6 months. Their technology was far beyond anything humans had ever seen. Their ships moved faster and hit harder than anything in the human fleet. When they attacked a world, the defenders usually lasted less than a day. Rodriguez had seen the recordings from New Geneva before the communication networks went dark. The aliens didn't just conquer worlds, they processed the populations. Families were separated and sent to different labor camps. Children were taken away for something the aliens called reconditioning. Adults who resisted were simply eliminated. She remembered watching a video of Governor Helen White trying to negotiate surrender terms for her planet. The alien commander had listened politely, then informed her that the Hegemony did not negotiate. They gave orders and expected complete obedience. The governor had signed the surrender documents anyway, hoping to save her people. 3 days later, the processing camps were operational and Governor White was never seen again. The Liberty had been part of the rear guard trying to buy time for the evacuation fleets. One by one, the other ships in her squadron had been destroyed or disabled. Now she was alone, facing an entire alien battle group with no hope of victory and no chance of escape. Captain, Harrison said quietly, the crew is waiting for your orders. Rodriguez knew what they expected. Every military manual said the same thing. When facing certain death with no tactical options available, a commander had the responsibility to save as many lives as possible. Surrender was the logical choice. It was the reasonable choice. It was the choice any sane person would make, but Rodriguez had seen what happened to humans who surrendered to the Hegemony. Death in battle was quick. What the aliens did to prisoners was something else entirely. She thought about her crew members who had families in the refugee fleets. If the Liberty surrendered, the aliens would extract information about the evacuation routes and hunting down those civilian ships would become much easier. The alien voice came through the comm again. Human vessel, you have 2 minutes remaining. Prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in immediate execution of your crew. Rodriguez walked to the center of the bridge and looked at each of her officers. They were young and scared, but they were also angry. The aliens had taken everything from them. Their homes, their families, their entire civilization was either dead or running for their lives through the darkness between stars. Lisa, Rodriguez said into the intercom, I need everything you can give me. Route all available power to weapons and engines. I don't care if the reactor overloads. Captain, Carter's voice came back, if I do that, we'll have maybe 10 minutes before the whole ship comes apart. Then we better make those 10 minutes count, Rodriguez replied. She turned to Harrison. Jake, target their lead ship. I want everything we have left aimed at their command vessel. Harrison stared at her. Captain, are you ordering us to attack? We can't win this fight. No, Rodriguez said. "We probably can't win, but we can make them pay for what they've done. And maybe, just maybe, we can show them that humans don't roll over and play dead when someone points a gun at us." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of failing systems and the distant sound of air recyclers working overtime to keep the atmosphere breathable. Every person on the bridge understood what their captain was saying. She was choosing death over surrender. She was choosing to fight an impossible battle rather than submit to an enemy that had never known defeat. One by one, the crew members returned to their stations. Harrison's hands moved across his tactical controls and weapon systems came online. Carter's voice came through the intercom reporting that she had found power reserves no one knew existed. The helmsman checked his controls and found enough maneuvering power for one last dance with death. The alien voice came through the "come for the final time." "Human vessel, your time has expired. Prepare to be destroyed." Rodriguez looked at the massive alien ships surrounding her and felt something she had not felt since the war began. She felt hope. Not hope for victory or survival, but hope that her choice would matter. Hope that somewhere in the darkness, the refugee fleets would hear about the Liberty's last stand and know that someone had chosen to fight rather than surrender. All stations report ready, Harrison said. Rodriguez nodded and gave the order that would seal their fate. Fire. Admiral Frank Mitchell stood in the command center of the evacuation carrier New Hope and watched the tactical display with growing amazement. 3 hours ago, he had received an encrypted transmission from the Liberty reporting that Captain Rodriguez was surrounded and preparing for her final battle. Now he was watching that battle unfold in real time through the ship's long-range sensors. The display showed one small human vessel dancing between 12 massive alien dreadnoughts like a fighter pilot weaving through enemy formations. Rodriguez was using tactics that no military academy had ever taught. She was treating her battlecruiser like a fighter craft, and somehow it was working. "Sir," Communications Officer Beth Cooper said, "we're receiving tactical data from the Liberty. Captain Rodriguez is broadcasting everything on emergency frequencies. Every human ship in 3 sectors is watching this." Mitchell nodded but kept his eyes on the display. The Liberty had just used a destroyed alien fighter as cover while she targeted the engines of a dreadnought. The alien ship was too big to maneuver quickly, and Rodriguez had found its blind spot. Her torpedo spread hit perfectly, and the massive vessel began to drift out of formation. Dr. Susan Palmer approached the Admiral's station carrying a datapad. She was the fleet's xenobiologist and had spent years studying alien psychology before the war began. "Admiral, you need to understand what we're seeing here. The hegemony has conquered 47 different species across the galaxy. Every single one of them surrendered when faced with overwhelming force." "And?" Mitchell asked without looking away from the tactical display. "It's how their entire society functions," Palmer explained. "Superior force demands submission. They literally cannot understand a species that would choose death over surrender. Look at their formation. They're hesitating because Rodriguez isn't following the script." On the display, the Liberty had somehow managed to position herself between 2 dreadnoughts and was using their own weapons fire as cover. The alien ships were having trouble targeting her without risking hits on each other. It was insane and desperate, and somehow it was working. "Commander." Rick Davis received the transmission while his fighter squadron was limping away from the outer colonies. His pilots were exhausted and their ships were running on emergency power. But when they heard Rodriguez's words, everything changed. The transmission was simple and clear. "This is Captain Maria Rodriguez of the UES Liberty. We are engaging a superior enemy force. We will not surrender. Humanity does not surrender." Davis looked at his squadron of 30 fighters. They were the survivors from 3 different battles, and their ships showed the damage. Half his pilots were wounded, and all of them were running on maybe 4 hours of sleep in the past 3 days. By any reasonable measure, they should continue their retreat to the rally point. "Boss," his wingman, Lieutenant Amy Foster, said over the comm, "are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" Davis checked his navigation display. They were 6 hours away from the Liberty's position at maximum burn. His ships might not have Enough fuel to make the return trip, and they definitely didn't have enough firepower to change the outcome of a battle against 12 dreadnoughts. "All pilots listen up," Davis said over the squadron frequency. "We have new orders. We're going back." "Sir," Foster replied, "we barely have enough fuel to reach the rally point. If we turn around now, we'll be flying on fumes." "Then we better make it count," Davis said, and changed course toward the battle, back on Earth. General Patricia Allen sat in the underground command bunker that had once been the Pentagon. The planet had been under alien occupation for 2 months, but pockets of human resistance remained hidden in bunkers and caves around the world. The Liberty's transmission was being broadcast on every surviving human communication network. Allen watched the tactical display with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. Rodriguez was fighting the kind of battle that would be studied in military academies for generations if there were any academies left to study it. But more importantly, she was showing the galaxy that humans would not go quietly into slavery. "General," Sergeant Tony Clark said from the communications station, "we're receiving reports from resistance cells worldwide. They're all asking the same question. Are we going to do something or just watch?" Allen looked around the command center at the faces of her staff. They were the survivors from the Joint Chiefs, and their eyes held the same desperate hope she had seen in Rodriguez's transmission. The Liberty was fighting an impossible battle, but she was fighting it on her own terms. "Contact all resistance cells," Allen ordered. "Tell them to prepare for Operation Defiance. If Captain Rodriguez can take on 12 dreadnoughts with one ship, then we can damn sure make life difficult for the occupation forces." The transmission from the Liberty continued to broadcast across human space and beyond. Rodriguez's words were being translated into dozens of alien languages and somehow finding their way to worlds that had been conquered years ago. On the mining world of Kepler 442, the native Thornians listened to the translation and for the first time in 3 years began to question why they had surrendered so quickly. Dr. Palmer pointed to another section of the tactical display where something unprecedented was happening. "Admiral, look at the alien fleet formation. They're making mistakes. Their coordination is breaking down because they can't predict what Rodriguez will do next." Mitchell watched as the Liberty performed another impossible maneuver. Rodriguez had somehow gotten behind the alien flagship and was targeting its communication array. The aliens were responding with panic fire that was as likely to hit their own ships as the human vessel. "She's not just fighting them," Palmer said with growing excitement. "She's teaching them that everything they believe about warfare is wrong. The hegemony builds their entire strategy on the assumption that inferior forces will surrender when faced with superior firepower. Rodriguez is proving that assumption false." The transmission from the Liberty changed. Instead of just tactical data, Rodriguez's voice came through clear and strong. "This is Captain Rodriguez to all human forces. We are showing these aliens something they have never seen before. We are showing them that humans don't surrender, we adapt. We overcome, we survive." Mitchell felt something stir in his chest that he had not felt since the war began. It was not hope for victory because victory seemed impossible. It was something else entirely. It was pride. Pride in being human and belonging to a species that produced people like Maria Rodriguez. "Sir," Cooper said from the communications station, "I'm receiving confirmations from human ships across 3 sectors. They're all changing course. They're all heading for the Liberty's position." Mitchell looked at the tactical display and saw the truth of it. Scattered human vessels that had been retreating or hiding were suddenly appearing on long-range sensors. They were coming from all directions, and they were all heading toward an impossible battle that they could not win. "Set course for the Liberty," Mitchell ordered. "All ships, maximum burn. If Rodriguez wants to show the galaxy what humans are made of, then by God, we're going to help her do it." The Liberty shuddered under the impact of alien weapons fire, but somehow kept flying. Captain Rodriguez gripped her command chair as the ship rolled to avoid another massive energy beam that would have cut them in half. Chief Engineer Carter had performed miracles in the engine room, rerouting power through damaged systems that should have failed hours ago. "Jake, give me a firing solution on their lead ship," Rodriguez ordered as she watched the tactical display. The alien flagship was trying to position itself for a killing shot, but she had other plans. Lieutenant Harrison's hands flew over his controls. "Captain, I have a lock, but their shields are still at 80%. Our weapons won't even scratch them. We're not trying to destroy them," Rodriguez said. "We're trying to confuse them, target their sensor array." The Liberty's remaining torpedo tubes fired and 6 projectiles streaked toward the massive alien vessel. The dreadnought's point? Defense systems destroyed 4 of them, but 2 got through and exploded against the ship's sensor cluster. The alien vessel didn't take serious damage, but suddenly it was flying blind. Admiral Zethkar stood on the bridge of his flagship and felt something he had never experienced in 20 years of conquest. He felt uncertainty. The human ship should have been destroyed in the first minutes of battle. Instead, it continued to dart between his vessels like an insect avoiding the swats of giants. "Fleet Commander," his tactical officer reported, "the human vessel has damaged our primary sensors. We are operating on backup systems only." Zethkar studied the tactical display with growing frustration. His 12 dreadnoughts should have been able to destroy 1,000 ships like the Liberty, but the human captain was using tactics that made no sense. She was treating the battle like a 3-dimensional maze instead of a proper military engagement. "All ships concentrate fire on the human vessel," he ordered. "I want that ship destroyed immediately." But Rodriguez had anticipated the order. As soon as the alien ships began to converge, she dove toward the wreckage of a destroyed fighter and used it as cover. The massive alien weapons were designed to engage other capital ships, and they had trouble targeting something as small and fast as the Liberty Dot in the engine room. Carter worked frantically to keep the ship's systems running. The reactor was operating at 150% of safe limits, and the hull was developing stress fractures from the impossible maneuvers Rodriguez was demanding. But somehow everything held together. "Captain," Carter's voice came through the intercom, "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up. The hull is starting to buckle and we're losing atmosphere through 12 different breaches. Just give me 5 more minutes," Rodriguez replied as she plotted her next move. She had noticed something about the alien formation that gave her an idea. The dreadnoughts were maintaining perfect spacing to avoid collisions, but that spacing also created blind spots. If she could get the Liberty into the right position, she might be able to force them to choose between hitting her or hitting each other. "Jake, plot a course straight through the center of their formation. I want to thread the needle between their 2 lead ships." Harrison stared at her in disbelief. "Captain, the gap between those ships is barely wider than our hull. If we miscalculate by even a few meters, we'll be vaporized." "Then we better not miscalculate," Rodriguez said. The Liberty accelerated directly toward the alien battle line. The massive dreadnoughts opened fire with everything they had, but Rodriguez was counting on their own discipline working against them. The alien captains were too well trained to risk hitting their own ships, and that gave her the opening she needed. The Liberty shot through the gap between the 2 lead ships with meters to spare. The alien weapons fire followed her, but suddenly the 2 dreadnoughts found themselves aiming at each other across the narrow space where the human ship had just passed. Their captains held fire rather than risk friendly casualties, and Rodriguez was through their line. Commander Davis arrived with his fighter squadron, just as the Liberty broke through the alien formation. His 30 fighters were running on fumes, and half his pilots were barely conscious, but they had made it in time to help. "Liberty, this is Viper Squadron," Davis called over the comm. "We're here to lend a hand." Rodriguez felt a surge of hope as the fighters spread out around her ship. 30 fighters couldn't take on 12 dreadnoughts, but they could provide the distraction she needed for her final gambit. "Viper Squadron, I need you to hit their rear guard. Draw their attention away from the flagship." Davis led his squadron in a desperate attack on the alien ships at the back of the formation. The fighters were like gnats attacking elephants, but they were fast and unpredictable. The alien point defense systems had trouble tracking so many small targets moving at high speed. While the aliens dealt with the fighter attack, Rodriguez positioned the Liberty for her most desperate move yet. The alien flagship was directly ahead of her, and she could see the massive weapon batteries turning to target her ship. She had one chance to make this work. Carter, I need everything the reactor can give me. Transfer all power to forward shields and prepare for ramming speed. Captain, Carter replied, if we ram them at full speed, the impact will destroy us too. I'm not planning to ram the whole ship, Rodriguez said. Just their weapon array. The Liberty accelerated toward the alien flagship on a collision course. Admiral Zethkar watched in amazement as the tiny human ship charged directly at his massive vessel. It was suicide, but it was also something he had never seen before. No conquered species had ever attempted such a desperate tactic. At the last possible second, Rodriguez fired the ship's remaining thrusters and twisted the Liberty into a sideways slide. Instead of ramming the alien ship head-on, the Liberty scraped along the flagship's hull and tore through its primary weapon batteries. The impact nearly tore the human ship apart, but it also left the alien flagship defenseless. Harrison had been waiting for this moment. As soon as the alien weapons were disabled, he fired every remaining torpedo the Liberty carried. The projectiles struck the flagship's bridge and command center. Admiral Zethkar had just enough time to realize that everything he believed about warfare was wrong before his ship exploded. The destruction of the flagship sent shock waves through the alien formation. For the first time in their military history, a hegemony fleet had lost its commander to an inferior force. The remaining ships began to scatter as their captains tried to process what had just happened. Davis led his fighters in one final attack on the retreating aliens. 2 more dreadnoughts took critical damage and began to drift away from the battle. The rest of the hegemony fleet jumped to hyperspace rather than continue fighting an enemy they could not understand. The Liberty hung motionless in space, her hull cracked and her systems failing, but she was still intact and her crew was still alive. Against impossible odds, they had not only survived, but won. Rodriguez looked around the bridge at her crew. They were exhausted and wounded, but they were also something else. They were proud. They had shown the galaxy that humans would not surrender, and they had made the aliens pay for underestimating them. Jake, Rodriguez said quietly, send a message. To all human forces, tell them we held the line. Tell them we showed these aliens what happens when they pick a fight with humanity. The message went out across the galaxy and carried with it something that had been missing since the war began. It carried hope. The news of the Liberty's impossible victory spread across the galaxy faster than the hegemony could control it. On the mining world of Kepler 442, a Thornian worker named Grix listened to the translated broadcast while hauling ore carts in the deep tunnels. The Thornians had surrendered to the hegemony 3 years ago without firing a single shot. Their leaders had calculated that resistance was futile and submission was the only logical choice. But as Grix listened to the description of Captain Rodriguez ramming her damaged ship into an alien dreadnought, something stirred inside him that had been dormant since the surrender. If humans could fight 12 massive warships with one broken vessel, then maybe the Thornians had made the wrong choice. Maybe there were things more important than survival. Grix began to whisper the story to other workers in the tunnels. By the end of the shift, the tale had spread to every level of the mine. The Thornian overseers noticed that productivity had dropped and the workers seemed distracted, but they couldn't understand why. They had no idea that the concept of resistance was spreading through their workforce like wildfire on the water. World of Proxima Centauri, be the aquatic. Drift swimmers received the transmission through their underwater communication networks. They had been processing algae for the hegemony food production centers for 2 years. The work was mind-numbing, but it kept them alive, and their leaders had convinced them that cooperation was better than extinction. A young drift swimmer named Flow Current listened to Rodriguez's final transmission where she declared that humans adapt, overcome, and survive. The words resonated with something deep in Flow Current's genetic memory. Her people had once been explorers who traveled between star systems in great generational ships. They had faced the unknown with courage and curiosity. When had they become so afraid of taking risks? Flow current began to sabotage the processing equipment in small ways that would be hard to detect. A calibration error here, a damaged component there. Nothing that would cause immediate suspicion, but enough to reduce output and force the alien overseers to work harder to meet their quotas on Earth. General Allen received confirmation that Operation Defiance was ready to begin. Resistance cells on 6 continents had been preparing for simultaneous strikes against hegemony installations. The alien occupation forces had grown comfortable with human submission. They were about to learn that comfort was a dangerous luxury. When dealing with a species that had just proven it could defeat impossible odds, Allen stood in the command bunker and looked at the tactical displays showing resistance positions around the globe. New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, Sydney, and Lagos all reported ready status. The aliens had concentrated their forces in major population centers, but they had left their supply depots and communication relays lightly guarded. All units, this is Control, Allen broadcast on the encrypted resistance frequency. Remember what Captain Rodriguez showed us? We don't surrender and we don't give up. Operation Defiance is a go. The attacks began at exactly midnight Greenwich. Meantime, in New York, a team of resistance fighters led by Captain Dave Murphy used homemade explosives to destroy an alien fuel depot. The explosion lit up the Manhattan skyline and could be seen for miles. It was the first successful attack on hegemony forces since the occupation began. In London, Commander Sarah Hill led a strike team into an alien communication center. The hegemony had been using the facility to coordinate operations across Europe. Hill's team fought their way through alien security forces and managed to destroy the main transmitter array before escaping into the underground tunnel networks. The pattern repeated around the globe. Small teams of human fighters striking at carefully selected targets and then disappearing before the aliens could respond. For the first time since the invasion, the hegemony occupation forces found themselves on the defensive. Admiral Mitchell, aboard the New Hope, received tactical updates from across human space. The evacuation fleets had abandoned their retreat and were now actively hunting hegemony supply convoys. Captain Rodriguez's tactics were being studied and adapted by human commanders throughout the fleet. Admiral, Communications Officer Cooper, reported, "We're receiving surrender requests from 3 hegemony outposts in the Vega sector. They're requesting safe passage in exchange for not destroying their supply caches." Mitchell almost couldn't believe what he was hearing. 3 months ago, the idea of alien forces surrendering to humans would have been absurd. Now it was becoming routine as scattered hegemony. Units found themselves cut off and outnumbered by increasingly aggressive human raiders. Dr. Palmer studied the incoming intelligence reports with growing excitement. "Admiral, this is exactly what I predicted. The hegemony's entire empire is built on psychological dominance. When that dominance is challenged successfully, the whole system begins to collapse. On 47 conquered worlds, the subject species were beginning to ask dangerous questions. If humans could defeat the mighty hegemony fleet, then maybe the aliens were not invincible after all. Maybe surrender had been a choice rather than an inevitability. The rebellion spread in ways the hegemony had never experienced before. On the crystal world of Andara, the native crystallines began to vibrate at frequencies that shattered alien equipment. They had never tried this before because their leaders had convinced them that cooperation was safer than resistance. In the gas giant system of Helios, the energy beings known as sparks began to interfere with hegemony power grids. They had the ability to disrupt electrical systems, but had never used it against their conquerors. The story of the Liberty had shown them that sometimes the seemingly impossible was actually possible. Captain Rodriguez had been rescued from the wreckage of the Liberty along with most of her crew. She was recovering aboard the hospital ship Mercy when Admiral Mitchell brought her the reports of spreading rebellion across the galaxy. "Captain," Mitchell said, "you need to understand what you've accomplished. Your stand at Haven's Edge didn't just save the evacuation fleets, it started a revolution." Rodriguez looked at the tactical displays showing rebel activity on dozens of worlds. She had known that her choice to fight rather than surrender would matter, but she had never imagined it would have consequences on this scale. Admiral, she said quietly, I just did what any human would do when faced with bullies. I fought back. Maybe, Mitchell replied, but you did it at exactly the right time and in exactly the right way. You showed 47 enslaved species that the hegemony could be beaten. Now they're all trying to beat them too. The reports continued to pour in from across the galaxy. On Kepler 442, the Thornian uprising had taken control of 3 mining complexes. On Proxima Centauri b, the drift swimmers had completely shut down algae production. On Earth, the resistance cells were launching new attacks every day and the alien occupation forces were struggling to maintain control. Dr. Palmer's analysis proved correct as the rigid hegemony command structure began to crack under pressure. It had never been designed to handle. For generations, the aliens had conquered through superior firepower and psychological intimidation. They had no protocols for dealing with subject species that refused to stay conquered. Rodriguez asked to be transferred to a new ship so she could continue fighting. The Brass wanted to make her a symbol and keep her safe, but she refused to hide while other humans were still in danger. Within a month, she was commanding a new vessel built from salvaged parts and volunteer crew members. The ship was called the Liberty II, and it became the flagship of the growing resistance fleet. Rodriguez used the same tactics that had won her the impossible victory at Haven's Edge. Hit fast, hit hard, and never let the enemy predict what you'll do next. More importantly, she continued to broadcast her message across the galaxy. Humanity does not surrender. Humanity adapts, overcomes, and survives. And now 47 other species were beginning to believe that they could do the same thing. 2 years after the Battle of Haven's Edge, Admiral Maria Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the rebuilt UES Liberty and watched as representatives from 49 different species signed the Galactic Freedom Charter. The ceremony was taking place in Earth's orbit aboard the massive space station that had once been a hegemony command center. Now it served as the headquarters for the Galactic Liberation Alliance, the hegemony. Empire had collapsed 6 months ago when their homeworld finally fell to a combined assault by the species they had once enslaved. The rigid alien hierarchy had been unable to adapt to fighting enemies who refused to follow the rules of conventional warfare. Every time they thought they had contained one rebellion, 3 more would spring up somewhere else, Rodriguez remembered. The moment she realized they were actually winning, it had been during the liberation of the Vega colonies when a hegemony fleet commander had requested terms for surrender, rather than face another impossible battle against human forces. The psychological impact of that first alien surrender had rippled across the galaxy and convinced other species that victory was actually possible. Admiral, Lieutenant Jake Harrison said from his position at the tactical station, the ceremony is ready to begin. Representatives from all member worlds are standing by. Rodriguez nodded and activated the ship-wide communication system. She had been chosen to speak for humanity at this historic moment, but she knew the words she spoke would represent more than just her own species. They would represent the universal desire for freedom that had brought so many different worlds together. Citizens of the galaxy, she began. 2 years ago, we lived in a universe where freedom was a privilege that could be taken away by anyone with superior firepower. Today, we live in a universe where freedom is a right that we will defend with our lives. Through the viewports, she could see ships from dozens of different worlds. Thornian crystal vessels flew alongside human battlecruisers. Drift swimmer bioships moved in formation with the energy constructs that the Sparks used for space travel. Each species had contributed their unique abilities to the war effort, and each had proven that resistance was possible when courage replaced fear. The Galactic Freedom Charter was more than just a peace treaty. It was a declaration that no species would ever again be forced to choose between submission and extinction. The member worlds had agreed to maintain a joint defense force that would respond to any attempt at galactic conquest. The galaxy had learned the lesson that Rodriguez had taught at Haven's Edge, that freedom was worth fighting for even when the odds seemed impossible. Commander Rick Davis, now promoted to admiral, approached Rodriguez's command station, his fighter. Squadrons had become the backbone of the Liberation Fleet's rapid response capability. The tactics he had learned from Rodriguez's example had been adopted by pilots throughout the Alliance. "Maria," Davis said quietly, "the Intelligence Division is reporting some interesting developments in the Outer Rim sectors. It seems like word of our success is spreading beyond our galaxy. We're picking up transmissions from other galactic clusters where enslaved species are beginning their own rebellions." Rodriguez smiled at the thought. The idea that their struggle might inspire freedom movements in other galaxies was almost too amazing to comprehend, but it made sense in a way. Courage was contagious, and the story of species that had refused to surrender would naturally spread to anyone living under oppression. Dr. Susan Palmer joined them at the command station carrying a report on the psychological effects of the war. Her studies of alien behavior had been crucial in understanding how to break the hegemony's control over their subjects. "Admiral," Palmer said, "I've been analyzing the surrender patterns of the remaining hegemony holdouts. The psychological cascade effect that began with your stand at Haven's Edge has completely undermined their ability to maintain control. Species that have been pacified for decades are suddenly remembering what it means to be free. The liberation of Earth had taken 3 years of guerrilla warfare, but it had finally succeeded when General Allen's resistance forces coordinated with the orbital bombardment from Rodriguez's fleet. The sight of human ships returning to Earth's skies had broken the morale of the occupation forces. Most of the alien garrison had surrendered. Without a fight, rather than face urban combat against an aroused human population, the rebuilding process had been difficult, but it had also brought out the best in human nature. Cities that had been devastated by the occupation were being reconstructed with help from other liberated species. The Thornians provided crystal technology for communication networks. The drift swimmers shared their biotechnology for food production. The Sparks contributed energy systems that were far more efficient than anything humans had developed. "Admiral Rodriguez," came a voice from the communication station. "We have an incoming transmission from the outer colonies. Captain Lisa Carter, aboard the exploration vessel Pioneer, is requesting permission to establish first contact with a newly discovered species in the Centaurus sector." Rodriguez felt a familiar surge of excitement. Carter had been her chief engineer during the battle at Haven's Edge and had since been given command of her own ship. The fact that humans were once again exploring unknown regions of space and making peaceful contact with new species showed how far they had come from the dark days of the hegemony. "Occupation. Tell Captain Carter she has permission to proceed," Rodriguez replied, "and remind her to follow the Alliance protocols for first contact. We want to make sure any new species we meet understands that we come in peace." The irony was not lost on her. 2 years ago, humans had been fighting for their very survival against an enemy that seemed invincible. Now they were the ones making first contact with new species and teaching them about concepts like freedom and self-determination. The ceremony continued with each species, representatives signing the charter in their own language and according to their own customs. The Thornians sang their commitment in harmonic crystals that resonated throughout the station. The drift swimmers created a water sculpture that somehow captured the essence of their promise to defend freedom. The Sparks manifested their signature as a pattern of light that danced through the air. When it came time for the human representative to sign, Rodriguez stepped forward and thought about all the people who had made this moment possible. She thought about her crew aboard the original Liberty who had chosen to fight rather than surrender. She thought about the resistance fighters on Earth who had never given up hope. She thought about the pilots like Davis who had flown impossible missions against overwhelming odds. Most of all, she thought about the simple choice she had made in the face of certain death. The choice to fight back against bullies even when victory seemed impossible. That choice had started a chain reaction that had freed an entire galaxy and proven that courage was more powerful than any weapon. Rodriguez signed her name on the charter and spoke the words that would be remembered for generations. Humanity pledges to defend the freedom of all species and to never again allow tyranny to rule the stars. As the ceremony ended and the various delegations began to depart, Rodriguez remained on the bridge looking out at the stars. Earth was visible through the viewport, blue and green and beautiful in the afternoon sun. It was a world that had been enslaved and was now free. It was a symbol of what was possible when people refused to give up hope. "Admiral," Harrison said, "we're receiving reports from the border sectors. 3 more hegemony remnant fleets have requested terms for surrender. It looks like the last holdouts are finally ready to accept that the war is over." Rodriguez nodded, but her thoughts were already turning to the future. The galaxy was free, but freedom required constant vigilance. There would always be new threats and new challenges. But she was confident that the species of the galaxy had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the most important battles were the ones you were supposed to lose. Sometimes not blinking in the face of impossible odds was the most powerful force in the universe. And sometimes one person's choice to fight rather than surrender could change the course of history and free an entire galaxy from tyranny.